In the fog-choked streets of 1930s London, a chilling mystery unfolds when young barrister Arthur Harrow vanishes after a cryptic theatre visit. Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster from Dainford, steps into the shadows to unravel the truth. Anonymous letters hint at betrayal, a missing pocketbook hides deadly secrets, and a body in the Thames points to murder. From the opulent halls of Grosvenor Square to the smoky alleys of the Lyceum, Miss Marple follows a trail of ink stains, cigar smoke, and whispered conspiracies. As the fog lifts, she exposes a web of deceit spun by a cunning widow and a slippery financier. Will justice prevail in this deadly game of truth? Chapter 1. The Telegram from London. The autumn dusk settled over Dainford with a chill that crept through the cracks of even the cosiest homes. In her modest cottage on Willow Lane, Miss Jane Marple sat by the fire, her needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale pink shawl for her niece's newborn. The room was a picture of order. Lace doilies on the polished table, a vase of late-blooming roses, and a bookshelf heavy with well-thumbed volumes of history and poetry. Outside, the wind carried the scent of damp leaves and the distant bark of a dog, but within all was serene until a sharp rap at the door broke the evening's calm. Lily, the young maid with a propensity for nervous chatter, bustled in, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "A telegram, Miss Marple," she said, holding out the thin envelope as if it might bite. "Came just now. Special delivery. The boy said it's from London." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her small bird-like hands moving with deliberate care. Telegrams were rare in Dainford, and one from London suggested something more than a casual greeting. She adjusted her spectacles and slit the envelope with a letter opener shaped like a miniature sword. A gift from her nephew Raymond, who fancied himself a wit. The message was brief, penned in the clipped urgency of someone unaccustomed to wasting words. "Dear Jane, urgent matter at hand. Your discretion needed. Please come to Grosvenor Square at once. Beatrice Harrow." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition. Lady Beatrice Harrow, an old school friend from their days at a finishing school in Florence, was not given to dramatics. Her wealth and position in London society made her a pillar of restraint. Yet this telegram carried a tremor of unease. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as the needles in her lap, began to turn. An urgent matter requiring discretion could mean many things. A scandal, a theft, perhaps even something darker. She had seen enough of human nature, even in quiet Dainford, to know that trouble wore many masks. "Lily," she said, folding the telegram neatly. "Fetch my timetable, please, and perhaps a cup of tea while I think." Lily scurried off, returning with a dog-eared railway guide and a steaming pot of Earl Grey. Miss Marple sipped thoughtfully, her eyes scanning the schedules. The 6:15 to Paddington would do nicely. She could be in London by nightfall. As she sipped, her thoughts drifted to Beatrice. They had not met in years, but their correspondence, though sporadic, was warm. Beatrice's letters often spoke of her nephew, Arthur Harrow, a barrister climbing the ranks of London's legal world. A clever young man, Beatrice had written, but ambitious, perhaps too much so. Miss Marple wondered if Arthur was the cause of this summons. Young men with ambition, she knew, often stirred up trouble as easily as they stirred up success. She rose, moving to her bedroom with the sprightly step of a woman who belied her years. From a wardrobe scented with lavender, she selected a sturdy tweed suit and her best hat, a sensible affair with a single feather. Her suitcase, packed with the efficiency of long practice, held only essentials: a spare blouse, a prayer book, and a small notebook for jotting observations. Miss Marple never travelled without it. People she found revealed more than they realised, and a quick note could fix a fleeting detail in place. As Lily helped her into her coat, the maid's curiosity bubbled over. "Is it something exciting, miss? London's full of goings-on, isn't it? My cousin says the fog there's so thick you can't see your own feet some days." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I expect I shall manage to see where I'm going, Lily. But yes, London does have its share of goings-on." She patted the girl's arm, her tone kind but final, signalling the end of questions. The station at Dainford was a short walk, and Miss Marple arrived with minutes to spare. The platform was nearly deserted, save for old Mr. Tuttle, who tipped his cap as he shuffled by with his evening paper. The train steamed in, its whistle cutting through the gathering mist. Miss Marple settled into a second-class carriage, her hands folded neatly over her handbag. As the countryside blurred past, her thoughts returned to Beatrice's telegram. The word discretion lingered in her mind, like a single off-key note in a familiar tune. Whatever awaited her in London, she suspected it would require more than polite conversation to unravel. The lights of Paddington Station soon loomed through the window, and Miss Marple stepped into the clamour of the city. The air was thick with coal smoke and the tang of wet wool, the fog already curling around lamp-posts like a living thing. A taxi carried her through streets where shadows moved in the haze, and as Grosvenor Square came into view, Miss Marple felt a familiar prickle of anticipation. Trouble, she knew, was rarely far behind a summons like this. And trouble, as she had learned in Dainford's quiet lanes, was often the prelude to something far more revealing. Chapter 2. The House on Grosvenor Square. Miss Jane Marple stepped from the taxi into the swirling fog of Grosvenor Square, her sensible shoes clicking softly on the damp cobblestones. The grandeur of Lady Beatrice Harrow's townhouse loomed before her, its Georgian facade softened by the mist, its tall windows glowing faintly like eyes peering through the gloom. A liveried footman, stiff as a tin soldier, ushered her inside, taking her modest suitcase with a deference that bordered on discomfort. Miss Marple, accustomed to the simpler courtesies of Dainford, noted his unease with a flicker of interest. Servants, she knew, were often the first to sense a household's disquiet. The entrance hall was a study in opulence. A crystal chandelier cast prisms on the polished marble floor, and a sweeping staircase curved upward to unseen rooms. Yet there was a chill in the air, not just from the autumn night, but from something less tangible, a tension that hung like the fog outside. Lady Beatrice Harrow descended the staircase, her silk gown rustling, her face a mask of controlled anxiety. She was a tall woman, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her eyes sharp despite lines etched by years of social manoeuvring. "Jane," she said, her voice low but warm, "you've come. I cannot tell you how grateful I am." Miss Marple took her friend's outstretched hands, her own small and gloved, and smiled with the quiet assurance that had disarmed many a confidant. "My dear Beatrice, your telegram was quite impossible to ignore. Now shall we have tea? And you must tell me everything." They settled in a drawing room adorned with gilt-framed portraits and heavy brocade curtains. A fire crackled in the grate, casting shadows that danced across Beatrice's strained features. The tea, served in delicate Sèvres cups, was accompanied by scones and a silver tray of petits fours. But Miss Marple sensed that appetite was far from Beatrice's mind. As the footman withdrew, closing the door with a soft click, Beatrice leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's Arthur," she began, her fingers tightening around her saucer. "My nephew, Arthur Harrow. You may recall I've mentioned him, a barrister, terribly clever, with chambers in Lincoln's Inn. He's been not himself these past weeks. Distracted, secretive, jumping at shadows. I thought it was the strain of his work. He's been defending that dreadful financier, Reginald Voss. You know, the one accused of fraud. But then these letters began arriving." Miss Marple's eyes, bright behind her spectacles, sharpened. "Letters?" Beatrice rose and retrieved a small bundle from a lacquered box on the mantel. She handed them to Miss Marple, who untied the ribbon with care. The envelopes were cheap, the kind sold at any corner stationer's, and the handwriting was a jagged scrawl, as if written in haste or anger. The messages were brief, typed on plain paper, and chillingly vague. "You cannot hide the truth forever. The past will find you. Betrayal has a price." Each was unsigned, posted from different parts of London, Whitechapel, Soho, Holborn. Miss Marple read them slowly, her mind cataloguing the words, the paper's texture, the faint smudge of ink on one corner. "They began a fortnight ago," Beatrice continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Arthur laughed them off at first, called them the work of a disgruntled client, but they kept coming, and he grew agitated. He'd lock himself in his study, poring over papers, muttering about evidence and mistakes. Then, last night, he didn't come home." Miss Marple set the letters down, her expression serene but her thoughts racing. "He was at his chambers yesterday." "Yes, working late, as he often does. He telephoned at 8 to say he had a meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. I thought nothing of it. Arthur's always kept odd hours. But when he didn't return by midnight, I telephoned his clerk, a young man named Perkins. He said Arthur left the chambers just before 12, alone, or so he thought. Perkins was vague absoluto. He wasn't certain." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers tapping lightly on the arm of her chair. "And this morning? Have you heard from him since?" Beatrice shook her head, her composure cracking. "Nothing. I sent a message to his chambers, but Perkins said he hasn't returned. Jane, I'm frightened. Arthur's ambitious, yes, but he's not reckless. Something's wrong. I feel it." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the details. Arthur's ambition, the threatening letters, his sudden absence. It was a puzzle with too few pieces, but she had solved such puzzles before. She recalled a young man in Dainford, a farmer's son who vanished after a quarrel over money, only to be found hiding in a neighbour's barn, nursing a broken heart. Arthur's case, she suspected, was more sinister. "Tell me about this Reginald Voss," she said, her tone gentle but probing. Beatrice sighed, settling back in her chair. A slippery character by all accounts. Accused of defrauding investors in some complicated stock scheme. Arthur's defence won him an acquittal last month, though the papers still call Voss a crook. Arthur was proud of the victory. It raised his standing in legal circles. But I wonder if it brought him enemies. Those letters. They mention betrayal. Truth. Could they be connected to Voss? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. Perhaps. And Arthur's behaviour. Did he mention any specific worries? A person? A place? Beatrice hesitated, her brow furrowing. He did say something odd a few days ago. We were dining here, and he mentioned a woman he'd met at a theatre, someone connected to Voss's case. He didn't give her name, but he seemed unsettled. He said she knew things she shouldn't. Things about evidence that never came up in court. I pressed him, but he changed the subject, saying it was nothing. Miss Marple's mind latched onto this. A woman, a theatre, hidden, evidence. It was a thread worth pulling. She thought of the village amateur theatricals in Dainford, where secrets often spilled in the heat of performance. People revealed themselves in unexpected places. Did Arthur carry anything of importance with him? Papers, perhaps. He always had a pocketbook, Beatrice replied, a small leather one, monogrammed with his initials. He kept notes in it, appointments, bits of legal jargon. He never went anywhere without it. If he's truly missing, that pocketbook might hold a clue. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the practical. I think, Beatrice, that I should visit Arthur's chambers in Lincoln's Inn. A barrister's office is a window into his life, and I may find something the clerk overlooked. Would you arrange for me to speak with Perkins? Of course, Beatrice said, relief softening her features. I'll telephone him at once. Oh, Jane, I knew you'd know what to do. You've always had a way of seeing through things. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her modesty masking a mind already weaving connections. I merely observe, Beatrice. People are not so different, whether in Dainford or London. They leave traces of their intentions, often without realizing it. As Beatrice rang for the footman to make the call, Miss Marple gazed at the fire, her thoughts drifting through the fog of possibilities. The anonymous letters, Arthur's late-night meeting, the mysterious woman at the theatre. Each was a fragment of a larger picture. She recalled a case in Dainford where a missing brooch led to a confession of theft, all because of a careless word overheard at the vicarage. Arthur's disappearance, she sensed, was no simple matter of a lost man. The letters suggested a grudge, the meeting a trap, and that pocketbook, if found, might unlock the truth. Beatrice returned, confirming that Perkins would expect Miss Marple at 9 the next morning. You'll stay here, of course, she added. I've had a room prepared. Thank you, Beatrice. I shall be quite comfortable. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. And now, if you'll excuse me, I think an early night would do me good. London air is rather invigorating. As she ascended the staircase to her room, Miss Marple's mind was far from rest. The fog outside seemed to mirror the mystery within, a tangle of motives and shadows. She thought of Arthur, a young man caught in a web of ambition and secrets, and wondered what the morning's visit to Lincoln's Inn would reveal. In her experience, the truth was like a stubborn knot. It took patience to unravel, but unravel it would. Chapter 3. The Fog of Lincoln's Inn. The morning broke with a thick London fog that clung to the streets like a conspirator's cloak, muffling sound and blurring the edges of reality. Miss Jane Marple, fortified by a modest breakfast of toast and tea in Lady Beatrice's opulent dining room, donned her coat and hat with the quiet determination of one accustomed to unravelling life's tangles. The taxi ride to Lincoln's Inn was a slow affair. the driver muttering about the weather as they inched through streets where gas lamps glowed like faint beacons. Miss Marple, peering through the window, found the fog oddly fitting, a visual echo of the mystery surrounding Arthur Harrow's disappearance. Lincoln's Inn, with its ancient stone buildings and hushed courtyards, exuded an air of solemnity, as if the law itself stood sentinel over its precincts. Miss Marple's destination was number 4, stone buildings, where Arthur kept his chambers. The porter, a wiry man named Jenkins with a face creased by years of squinting into fog, greeted her at the gate with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You're the lady come about Mr. Harrow?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Perkins is expecting you upstairs, 2nd floor." Miss Marple thanked him, noting the tremor in his hands as he gestured toward the staircase. Servants and porters, she had long observed, were barometers of trouble, their unease often betraying what their masters concealed. She climbed the narrow stairs, her steps light but deliberate, and found Perkins, Arthur's clerk, waiting in a cramped outer office, stacked with legal files and smelling faintly of ink and dust. Perkins was a young man, barely 25, with a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. "Miss Marple? Lady Beatrice said you'd come. I'm afraid there's little I can tell you. Mr. Harrow was here late last night, but he left and I've not seen him since." His words tumbled out too quickly, as if rehearsed. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag resting on her lap like a trusted ally. "Dear me, Mr. Perkins, you mustn't worry. I only wish to understand Mr. Harrow's movements. Tell me, what time did he leave, and was he alone?" Perkins hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with a pencil. "It was just before midnight. He'd been working late, as he often did, on some papers for a case. I was tidying up when I heard voices. Mr. Harrow's and another's, a man's, I think. They were outside in the courtyard. I couldn't make out the words, but Mr. Harrow sounded sharp, like he was arguing." Miss Marple's eyes, bright and bird-like, fixed on Perkins. "A man, you say? Did you see him?" Perkins shook his head. "The fog was thick, and I only glanced out the window. He was tall, wore a dark coat and hat. They walked off toward the gate, and that's the last I saw of Mr. Harrow." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the image of the tall stranger. "And the voices? What did you overhear, however faintly?" Perkins flushed, as if caught out. "It was muddled, miss, but I heard Mr. Harrow say something about evidence, and not letting it go. The other man said betrayal. I'm sure of that. It sounded threatening." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her thoughts quickened. The words echoed the anonymous letters Beatrice had shown her, suggesting a connection too pointed to ignore. "May I see Mr. Harrow's office?" she asked, rising with a sprightliness that belied her years. Perkins led her to a heavy oak door, unlocking it to reveal a room that spoke of Arthur's ambition. A mahogany desk piled with briefs, a leather armchair, and shelves groaning under the weight of law books. But disorder marred the scene. A drawer in the desk hung open, its lock splintered, and papers lay scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, pausing at a faint whiff of cigar smoke that lingered in the air, sharp and acrid. She thought of the Deanford tobacconist, Mr. Grimsby, who prided himself on identifying a man's cigar by its scent alone. This was no common blend, she suspected. "Was the office like this when you arrived this morning?" she asked, her tone mild but probing. Perkins paled. "No, miss. It was tidy when I left last night. Someone's been here. Someone who shouldn't have." Miss Marple knelt, her movements careful, and examined the scattered papers. Most were legal notes, dense with jargon, but one item caught her eye. A torn theatre ticket, half hidden beneath a blotter. It was for the Crimson Veil at the Lyceum Theatre, dated the previous night, the seat number smudged but legible, Box C. She tucked it into her handbag, her mind turning to Beatrice's mention of a woman Arthur had met at a theatre. Coincidence, she knew, was rarely so innocent. "Mr. Perkins," she said, straightening, "did Mr. Harrow mention attending the theatre recently?" Perkins frowned, adjusting his spectacles again. "Not directly, miss, but he did say something odd a few days ago. He was on the telephone, and I overheard him mention a play. Something about meeting someone there to discuss the matter. I didn't think much of it at the time." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts weaving a pattern. The ticket, the cigar smoke, the forced draw. It was as if Arthur's office were whispering secrets to her. She recalled a theft in Dainford, where a broken window and a single footprint had pointed to the culprit. Here, the signs were subtler, but no less telling. "One last thing," she said, her voice soft as a sigh. "Did Mr. Harrow keep a pocketbook? Perhaps one he always carried?" "Oh, yes," Perkins said eagerly. "A black leather one, with his initials, A.H., stamped in gold. He was never without it. Notes, reminders, even bits of poetry he liked to jot down. If it's not here, he must have had it with him." Miss Marple glanced at the desk, noting the absence of any such item. "Thank you, Mr. Perkins. You've been most helpful." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and the man in the courtyard. Did you notice anything else about him? A mannerism, perhaps?" Perkins hesitated, then said, "He walked with a limp, miss. Slight, but I saw it as they passed under the lamp." Miss Marple's smile was faint but satisfied. "Very good. I shall be in touch if I need you again." As she descended the stairs and stepped back into the fog, Miss Marple felt the weight of the theatre ticket in her handbag. A small but significant clue. The cigar smoke, the limping stranger, the word betrayal. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. She thought of Arthur, a young man caught in a web not entirely of his own making, and resolved to visit the Lyceum Theatre. In Dainford, she had once solved a mystery by tracing a single rose petal to its source. Here, in London's fog, she would follow the trail of a torn ticket and a whiff of smoke, certain they would lead her closer to the truth. Chapter 4. The Lyceum's Shadow. The fog had not relented as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the Lyceum Theatre, its marquee a faint glow in the murky afternoon. The streets of the Strand buzzed with the muted energy of Londoners navigating the haze, their figures darting like spectres past horse-drawn cabs and the occasional motor car. Miss Marple, her tweed coat buttoned against the damp, clutched her handbag, where the torn theatre ticket from Arthur Harrow's office rested like a silent witness. The Lyceum, with its grand arches and promise of melodrama, felt to her like a stage where truth might slip through the cracks of performance. Inside, the theatre's foyer was a faded echo of its Victorian splendour. Crimson carpets worn thin, gilt mirrors clouded with age, and a chandelier that flickered as if unsure of its own brilliance. Miss Marple approached the box office, where a clerk with a pinched face and a ledger book sat sorting tickets. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying the gentle authority of a village spinster who knew her questions would be answered. I wonder if you might help me with a small matter concerning last night's performance of the Crimson Veil." The clerk, a Mr. Tilling by his nameplate, looked up with mild irritation. "Last night? Busy evening, ma'am. What do you need to know?" Miss Marple produced the torn ticket, smoothing it on the counter. "This was for Box C, I believe. Could you tell me who purchased it? Or perhaps who was seen in that box?" Tilling squinted at the ticket, then flipped through his ledger with a sigh. "Box C, you say? Let's see. Yes, here it is. 2 seats, purchased at the last minute, just before curtain. Paid in cash by a lady. No name recorded, I'm afraid. We don't always ask for names on cash sales." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest. "A lady, you say? Can you describe her?" Tilling scratched his chin, his memory prodded by her calm persistence. "Elegant sort, dark hair, maybe 35. Wore a green velvet cloak and a hat with a veil. She was with a gentleman, tall, fair-haired, in a hurry. They didn't linger after buying the tickets, just went straight to the box." Miss Marple nodded, her mind painting a picture of Arthur Harrow with this mysterious woman. The description matched Beatrice's vague mention of a theatre acquaintance, and the cash purchase suggested a desire for anonymity. "Did you see them leave after the performance?" she asked. Tilling shook his head. "Can't say I did. The house was packed, and I was busy with latecomers. You might ask one of the stagehands. They notice things we don't." Miss Marple thanked him and ventured toward the auditorium, where a rehearsal was underway. The stage was alive with the melodrama of the Crimson Veil, a tale of betrayal and revenge that, to Miss Marple's mind, bore an uncanny resemblance to the case at hand. She found a stagehand, a wiry youth named Tom, sweeping the wings. His eyes lit up at the prospect of gossip, and he was eager to talk when Miss Marple mentioned the previous night's audience. "Box C, you say?" Tom said, leaning on his broom. "I remember them. The lady in the green cloak was a looker, but she kept her face half hidden. The gent with her was fidgety, kept checking his watch. Looked like he didn't want to be there. I saw them slip out before the final act, down the side stairs toward the actor's entrance." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "The actor's entrance? Did they meet anyone there?" Tom grinned, pleased to be useful. "Funny you ask. There was a fellow loitering outside, near the alley. Tall, dark coat, smoking a cigar. I noticed him because he was there before the show started, just watching the crowd. When the couple from Box C came out, he stepped forward, like he was waiting for them. They talked for a moment, then all 3 walked off into the fog. Couldn't see where they went." Miss Marple's thoughts raced. The cigar smoke in Arthur's office, the tall man with a limp described by Perkins. Here was another piece of the puzzle, and it fit too neatly to be coincidence. She recalled a Dainford scandal where a gardener's overheard conversation by the church gate had unravelled a theft. Here, the stagehand's casual observation was equally telling. "This man with the cigar," she said. "Did you notice anything particular about him? His manner, perhaps?" Tom frowned, thinking. He moved stiffly, like his leg bothered him. Kept his hat low, too, like he didn't want to be seen. Smelled of money, though. That cigar wasn't cheap. Miss Marple smiled faintly, tucking the detail away. "You've been most helpful, Tom. One more thing. Do you keep a list of season ticket holders or regular patrons?" Tom shook his head. "That's for the box office, ma'am. but I can tell you the lady in the green cloak ain't a regular. I'd remember her. The gent with the cigar, though. He's been round before, always lurking, never buying a ticket." Miss Marple thanked him and returned to the foyer, where she persuaded Mr. Tilling to share a partial list of season ticket holders. It was a formality, she suspected, as the woman in the green cloak seemed too cautious to leave a paper trail. Yet the list might yield a name connected to Arthur's case. A financier, perhaps, or a rival, as Shue thought of the anonymous letters, with their hints of betrayal, and the word evidence overheard by Perkins. The theatre, she mused, was a place where masks were worn, both literal and figurative, and Arthur had been drawn into a drama far deadlier than the one on stage. As she stepped back into the fog, Miss Marple felt the weight of the clues accumulating. The torn ticket, the cigar smoke, the limping man, the elegant woman. Each was a thread in a web that stretched from Lincoln's Inn to this shadowed theatre. In Dainford, she had once traced a missing necklace to a jealous housemaid through a single overheard whisper. Here the whispers were louder, the stakes higher. She resolved to speak with Beatrice again, to probe further into Arthur's connection to the mysterious woman and the financier, Reginald Voss. The Lyceum had offered a glimpse into the night of Arthur's disappearance, but the fog of truth remained thick. Miss Marple, undaunted, walked on, her mind as clear as the village air of Dainford, ready to unravel the next knot in this tangled tale. Chapter 5. A Body in the Thames. The fog had thickened by the time Miss Jane Marple returned to Grosvenor Square, its tendrils curling around the lamp-posts like a thief's fingers. She had barely removed her hat when Lady Beatrice Harrow met her in the drawing-room. Her face ashen, a newspaper clutched in her trembling hands. "Jane," she whispered, her voice breaking, "it's Arthur! They've found him, in the Thames." Miss Marple's heart sank, though her expression remained composed, her eyes sharp with the quiet resolve that had seen her through many a village tragedy. She took the newspaper, its headline screaming, "Barrister found dead in river, foul play suspected." The article was brief, stating that Arthur Harrow, aged 32, had been pulled from the waters near Blackfriars Bridge at dawn. A single stab wound to the chest, the cause of death. The police, led by Inspector Craddock of Scotland Yard, were treating it as a robbery gone wrong, noting the absence of Arthur's pocketbook. Miss Marple folded the paper, her mind already questioning the simplicity of the official narrative. "Beatrice, my dear," she said gently, guiding her friend to a chair. "This is a terrible shock, but we must be clear-headed. May I see the article again?" She scanned the details once more, noting the mention of Blackfriars Bridge, a mere mile from the Lyceum Theatre. The timing, the location, it was too close to the events Tom, the stagehand, had described. She thought of the tall man with the cigar, the woman in the green cloak, and the heated words overheard in Lincoln's Inn. A robbery, she mused, was a convenient explanation, but convenience rarely aligned with truth. "I must see him," Beatrice said, her voice steadier now, though her eyes were wet. "Will you come with me, Jane? To the morgue?" Miss Marple nodded, her small hand patting Beatrice's. "Of course, and perhaps we may learn something the police have overlooked." The journey to the morgue was a grim one, the taxi rattling through fog-choked streets where the city seemed to mourn in silence. The morgue, a cold, tiled building near the river, smelled of antiseptic and despair. Inspector Craddock, a burly man with a bristling moustache and a manner that suggested he preferred facts to fancies, met them at the entrance. "Lady Harrow, Miss Marple," he said, his tone clipped but courteous. "I'm sorry for your loss. We're doing all we can to find the culprit. Likely a thief, caught Mr. Harrow unawares. His pocketbook's gone, you see, common enough in these parts." Miss Marple's eyes, bright behind her spectacles, met his. "Indeed, Inspector. Might we see Mr. Harrow? It would ease my friend's mind." Craddock led them to a stark room, where Arthur lay on a slab, a sheet drawn to his chin. His face, once animated with ambition, was now still, his fair hair damp from the river. Beatrice stifled a sob, but Miss Marple, her composure unshaken, stepped closer. She noted the neatness of Arthur's clothing, a tailored suit, barely dishevelled despite his time in the water. The stab wound, visible through the unbuttoned shirt, was precise, a single thrust to the heart. Most telling, however, was the gold watch still gleaming on his wrist, its chain intact. "Inspector," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but pointed, "you say this was a robbery, yet his watch remains, a valuable item surely for any thief." Craddock frowned, rubbing his chin. "Aye, that's true, but the pocketbook's missing, and that's often enough for these river rats. Probably panicked after the deed and fled." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Panic, in her experience, was a poor explanation for such a deliberate wound. She leaned closer, her keen eyes catching a detail the police had missed. A faint blue smudge on Arthur's cuff, the kind left by fountain pen ink. It was fresh, not blurred by the water, suggesting he had been writing shortly before his death. She thought of the scattered papers in his office, the forced drawer and the missing pocketbook. A thief might take a wallet, but a pocketbook filled with notes. That spoke of a different motive. "Was anything else found on him?" she asked, her tone deceptively mild. Craddock consulted his notebook. "Just the usual. Keys, a handkerchief, a few coins, nothing out of the ordinary." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the theatre ticket and the cigar smoke. "And the time of death?" "The doctor reckons between midnight and 2 in the morning," Craddock replied. "Fits with when he left his chambers, according to his clerk." Beatrice, regaining her composure, spoke up. "Jane, you don't think this was a robbery, do you?" Miss Marple hesitated, aware of Craddock's sceptical gaze. "I think, Beatrice, that we must consider all possibilities. The inspector is doing his duty, but there are threads to follow." She turned to Craddock. "Might I ask if you've looked into Mr. Harrow's recent cases? He was defending a financier, I believe." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Reginald Voss, you mean? We've got our eye on him, but there's no evidence linking him to this. Voss is a slippery one, mind, but he's not the type to get his hands dirty." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her thoughts elsewhere. In Daneford, she had once solved a poisoning by noticing a misplaced teacup. Here, the ink stain and the untouched watch were equally eloquent. "Thank you, Inspector. You've been most kind." As they left the morgue, Beatrice clung to Miss Marple's arm. "What now, Jane? I can't bear the thought of Arthur's killer going free." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind already mapping the next step. "We shall visit Mr. Voss, Beatrice. A man acquitted of fraud may have secrets worth killing for. And that ink stain. Arthur was writing something before he died. If we find what it was, we may find his killer." The fog seemed to close in as they stepped into the street. But Miss Marple's resolve was unshaken. The river had claimed Arthur, but it had not washed away the truth. The woman in the green cloak, the limping man, the missing pocketbook. Each was a clue in a drama that had ended in murder. She thought of a Dainford widow who had hidden her husband's debts in a locked diary. Here, the locked secrets were deadlier, but no less traceable. With a quiet determination, Miss Marple vowed to follow the trail, wherever it led through London's fog. Chapter 6. The Financier's Secret. The fog had settled into a persistent shroud over London, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the offices of Reginald Voss, the financier whose acquittal had bolstered Arthur Harrow's reputation and perhaps sealed his fate. The address, a sleek building in the city near Threadneedle Street, stood in the stark contrast to the ancient stones of Lincoln's Inn. Its glass doors and polished brass fittings spoke of wealth, but Miss Marple, stepping from the taxi, sensed an undercurrent of unease beneath the facade, much like the strained politeness of a Dainford tea party hiding a village feud. Inside, the reception hall gleamed with marble and mirrors. A young clerk in a starched collar rising to greet her. "Miss Marple?" he said, his tone a mix of deference and curiosity. "Mr. Voss is expecting you, though he's terribly busy. This way, please." Miss Marple followed him up a carpeted staircase, her sensible shoes silent, her eyes noting the extravagance of the decor. A Persian rug, a crystal vase filled with hothouse lilies. Wealth, she knew, could mask many sins. And Reginald Voss's opulence suggested a man adept at keeping secrets. She recalled a Dainford grocer who had flaunted new wealth only to be exposed as a smuggler. Here, the stakes were higher, the secrets deadlier. Voss's office was a study in calculated charm. A vast desk of polished walnut, walls lined with leather-bound ledgers, and a window overlooking the fog-draped city. The man himself rose to greet her, a tall figure with slicked-back hair and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "Lady Beatrice mentioned you'd call. A terrible business about poor Arthur. Please sit." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag on her lap, her demeanour that of a harmless aunt come to pay a social call. But her eyes, bright and unyielding, missed nothing. Not the slight twitch in Voss's left hand, nor the ornate cigar case on his desk, its silver glinting in the lamplight. The faint scent of cigar smoke lingered, matching the acrid note she had detected in Arthur's chambers. She thought of the limping man Tom had seen at the Lyceum, and her suspicions tightened like a knot. "I shan't take much of your time, Mr. Voss," she began, her voice soft but deliberate. "I'm helping Lady Beatrice understand what happened to her nephew. You knew Arthur well, I believe, from his defence of your recent difficulties." Voss's smile faltered, though he recovered quickly. "Indeed, Arthur was a brilliant barrister. His work on my case was exemplary. I was shocked to hear of his death, shocked and saddened." Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Most kind of you to say so. I understand Arthur was troubled in his final days. Anonymous letters, late-night meetings. Did he mention anything to you about these matters?" Voss leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. "Letters? No, he never mentioned anything of the sort. As for meetings, Arthur was always busy. A barrister's life, you know. Endless appointments. I'm afraid I can't help you there." Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost apologetic, but her mind was racing. She had seen that same evasive charm in Dainford, in a schoolmaster who denied knowing about a stolen exam paper until a stray pencil mark betrayed him. "Of course," she said. "Though I wonder if you might recall a woman Arthur met recently, perhaps at the Lyceum Theatre." He seemed to think she knew something about your case, something that didn't come up in court. Voss's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he masked it with a laugh. "A woman? Arthur was a young man, Miss Marple. I'm sure he met many women. As for my case, it's done and dusted. The jury found me innocent, and I've moved on." Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded neatly. "Quite so. Yet it's curious, isn't it, how past troubles have a way of lingering. Like cigar smoke, perhaps." Her eyes flicked to the case on his desk, and Voss's fingers stilled, his smile tightening. Before he could respond, a young clerk burst in, his face flushed. "Mr. Voss, sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a gentleman from the bank on the line. Urgent." Voss rose, his relief palpable. "Excuse me, Miss Marple. Duty calls. My clerk will see you out." The clerk, a nervous youth named Baxter, escorted her to the reception hall. Miss Marple, sensing an opportunity, paused by the staircase. "You must be very busy, Mr. Baxter," she said, her tone warm and confiding. "Working for such an important man. Did you ever meet Mr. Harrow?" Baxter hesitated, glancing at the closed office door. "A few times, ma'am. He came here often during Mr. Voss's trial. Always polite, but, well, distracted the last time I saw him." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "When was that, dear?" 3 days ago, Baxter said, lowering his voice. "He was here late, arguing with Mr. Voss in his office. I couldn't help overhearing. Mr. Harrow mentioned a ledger, something about irregularities that could ruin everything. Mr. Voss told him to keep quiet, said it was handled." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. A ledger, perhaps the key to the anonymous letters and Arthur's unease. "And did you see Mr. Harrow with anyone else? A lady, perhaps?" Baxter flushed. "Well, there was a woman who came to see Mr. Voss last week. A Mrs. Clara Elton, a widow. She was at the Lyceum with him the night before last. I saw them when I dropped off some papers at the theatre. Mr. Voss asked me to deliver a message there." Miss Marple's mind seized on the name, Clara Elton. The woman in the green cloak, perhaps? "How very interesting," she said. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Baxter." As she stepped back into the fog, Miss Marple felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting. The cigar smoke, the ledger, Clara Elton, the threads were weaving together, pointing to a conspiracy that had cost Arthur his life. She recalled a Dainford widow who had hidden stolen jewels in a hymn book, betrayed by a single careless word. Here, Baxter's slip about the ledger, and Clara was equally damning. Voss, with his charm and cigars, was no innocent, and this Mrs. Elton was a new figure in the drama, one Miss Marple intended to meet. She resolved to return to Beatrice and arrange an encounter at the charity gala tomorrow night, where London's elite would gather, and secrets like the fog might part to reveal the truth. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. The charity gala at Lady Beatrice Harrow's Grosvenor Square townhouse was a glittering affair, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over the assembled guests, their jewels sparkling like stars against the fog pressing at the windows. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in a modest but elegant black lace gown, moved through the crowd with the unobtrusive grace of a Dainford spinster navigating a village fete. Her eyes, however, were anything but demure, scanning the room for Mrs. Clara Elton, the widow whose name had surfaced in her visit to Reginald Voss. Beatrice had confirmed Clara's attendance, and Miss Marple, armed with the clues of the theatre ticket, the cigar smoke, and the ink-stained cuff, felt the mystery drawing toward a crescendo. The ballroom was a whirl of silks and tailcoats, the air thick with perfume, and the murmur of polite conversation. A string quartet played a lilting waltz, but Miss Marple's attention was on the guests, their smiles masking secrets as surely as the fog hid London streets. She spotted Beatrice near the refreshment table, her face pale but composed as she greeted a viscountess. Miss Marple had shared her suspicions with her friend that afternoon, carefully outlining the connections between Clara Elton, Voss, and Arthur's murder. Beatrice, though shaken, had agreed to introduce Miss Marple to Clara, trusting her friend's instinct for unmasking truth. "There she is," Beatrice whispered, joining Miss Marple and nodding toward a woman standing near a potted palm. Clara Elton was striking, her dark hair coiled beneath a feathered headpiece, her green silk dress catching the light. Her eyes, sharp and watchful, darted across the room, as if searching for an escape or an ally. Miss Marple noted her gloved hands, one clutching a fan, the other a champagne flute, and recalled the ink stain on Arthur's cuff. A small detail, but in Dainford, a smudged recipe card had once led her to a pilfered church fund. Here, she suspected, the ink held a similar significance. "Mrs. Elton," Beatrice said, approaching with Miss Marple in tow, "may I present my dear friend, Miss Jane Marple? She's visiting from Dainford and has a keen interest in theatre." Clara's smile was polite but guarded, her gaze flicking over Miss Marple as if assessing a rival. "A pleasure, Miss Marple," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with caution. "Theatre, you say? London stages are quite the diversion." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. "I understand you attended the Crimson Veil at the Lyceum recently, with poor Mr. Harrow, I believe." Clara's fan paused mid-flutter, her eyes narrowing imperceptibly. "Arthur Harrow? Yes, I met him there briefly. A charming man, though I barely knew him. Such a tragedy what happened." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her mind was a steel trap. Most tragic. "I wonder, Mrs. Elton, if you noticed anyone else that night? A gentleman, perhaps, lingering near the actor's entrance, smoking a cigar?" Clara's composure faltered, her fingers tightening on her glass. "I don't recall. It was a busy evening, and the fog was dreadful. I left early, you see." "Oh, quite," Miss Marple said, her eyes fixed on Clara's gloves. There, on the right cuff, was a faint blue smudge, barely visible in the candlelight, but unmistakable to her keen gaze. It matched the ink on Arthur's cuff, a detail too precise to be coincidence. She thought of a Dainford seamstress whose stained apron had betrayed her theft of a silver spoon. Here, the ink was a silent accusation. "Forgive my curiosity," Miss Marple continued, "but Arthur seemed troubled before his death. Something about evidence from Mr. Voss's case, perhaps? A ledger, I believe." Clara's face drained of colour, her fan snapping shut. "I know nothing of ledgers or evidence," she said sharply. "If you'll excuse me, I must speak with a friend." She turned, her skirt swishing, and made for the French doors leading to the terrace. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind racing. Clara's reaction, the ink stain, the Lyceum connection, it was a pattern as clear as the lace on her gown. She recalled the anonymous letters, their threats of betrayal, and the limping man with the cigar. Clara, she suspected, had lured Arthur to the theatre, perhaps to retrieve incriminating documents, only for the meeting to end in murder. But who had wielded the knife? Voss, with his slippery charm, or another player yet unseen? She found Inspector Craddock near the ballroom's entrance, his broad frame ill at ease in a borrowed tailcoat. "Inspector," she said, drawing him aside, "I believe Mrs. Clara Elton knows more than she admits. She was with Arthur at the Lyceum the night he died, and her glove bears an ink stain matching one on his cuff. I suspect she was involved in a scheme to silence him, perhaps blackmail, tied to Mr. Voss's hidden ledgers." Craddock's moustache twitched sceptically. "That's a leap, Miss Marple. Mrs. Elton's a respectable widow, and we've no proof of any ledger." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Proof, Inspector, is often a matter of looking closely. Arthur was stabbed with precision, his watch untouched. This was no robbery, but a calculated act. I suggest you watch Mrs. Elton. She may try to leave." As if on cue, a footman hurried over, his face flushed. "Lady Beatrice, ma'am. Mrs. Elton's just called for her cloak and carriage. She's heading for the door." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her voice remained calm. "Inspector, I think it wise to detain her for questioning. She may hold the key to Arthur's murder." Craddock hesitated, then nodded. "Right. I'll have my men stop her discreetly. But I'll need more than an ink stain to hold her, Miss Marple." "Of course," she replied, her smile serene but resolute. "But you'll find, Inspector, that small details often unravel the largest crimes." As Craddock moved toward the entrance, Miss Marple lingered by the terrace doors, her thoughts turning to the fog outside. Clara's flight was a confession of sorts, but the full truth lay hidden, like a shadow in the mist. She recalled a Daneford poacher caught by a single feather left at a crime scene. Here, the ink and the cigar smoke were feathers of a different sort, pointing to a conspiracy that had claimed Arthur's life. The gala continued around her, its music and laughter a stark contrast to the dark drama unfolding. But Miss Marple knew the final act was near. Chapter 8. The Fog Lifts. The fog that had cloaked London for days seemed to pulse with secrets, as Miss Jane Marple stood by the terrace doors of Lady Beatrice Harrow's ballroom, the strains of the waltz fading behind her. The gala's glitter felt distant now, overshadowed by the urgency of Clara Elton's sudden flight. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as the needles in her Daneford knitting basket, wove together the threads of the case. The torn theatre ticket, the cigar smoke, the ink-stained cuff, and the limping man in the dark coat. Clara's abrupt departure confirmed her suspicions, but the full truth of Arthur Harrow's murder lay just beyond reach. Like a figure half seen in the mist, Inspector Craddock returned, his face grim but purposeful. "We've got her, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. Mrs. Elton was stopped at the door, trying to slip out with her carriage waiting. "She's in the library now, under guard. I'll need something solid to hold her, though. Ink stains won't do for the magistrate." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gleaming with quiet determination. "Then we must find something solid, Inspector. I suggest a visit to Mrs. Elton's lodgings. If she was involved in Arthur's death, there may be evidence, a letter, a document, perhaps even his pocketbook." Craddock hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Right. I'll get a warrant and send my men to her boarding house in Bloomsbury. But you're coming along, Miss Marple. Your eye for detail's uncanny, I'll give you that." The journey to Bloomsbury was swift. the fog parting briefly as the police carriage rattled through the gaslit streets. Clara's boarding house, a respectable but unassuming establishment, was quiet save for the landlady's startled gasp when Craddock presented his badge. "Mrs. Elton's room is upstairs," she said, wringing her hands. "She's been a model tenant, never any trouble." Miss Marple followed Craddock to a neatly furnished room, its single window overlooking a fog-choked courtyard. The space was orderly, with a writing desk, a wardrobe, and a small bookshelf holding novels and a Bible. Miss Marple's gaze settled on the desk, where a fountain pen lay uncapped, its nib stained with blue ink. She thought of the smudge on Clara's glove and Arthur's cuff, and her pulse quickened. "Inspector," she said, "might we examine the desk?" Craddock's men searched with practised efficiency, uncovering a locked drawer that yielded to a constable's tools. Inside was Arthur's pocketbook, its leather monogrammed with R.H. unmistakable. Tucked within was a folded note, written in a hurried scrawl. "Voss's, ledger, proof of payments to C.E., meet at Blackfriars, midnight." The ink matched the pen on the desk, and Miss Marple's lips pursed in satisfaction. The note was a beacon, illuminating the dark path to Arthur's death. "Clara Elton," Craddock muttered, holding the pocketbook. "She's in it up to her neck, but this note mentions Voss. We'll need to bring him in too." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. "I suggest we return to Grosvenor Square, Inspector. Mrs. Elton may be persuaded to talk, especially with this evidence." Back at the townhouse, Clara sat in the library, her composure fraying like a worn hem. Her green silk dress was creased, her eyes darting as Craddock laid the pocketbook and note before her. "Care to explain this, Mrs. Elton?" he asked, his tone hard. Clara's defiance crumbled. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice trembling. "It was Voss. He hired me to get the ledger. Arthur had found it, hidden records of bribes Voss paid to officials. I met Arthur at the Lyceum to convince him to hand it over, but he refused. He said he'd expose Voss, ruin him. I lured him to Blackfriars, yes, but only to talk. Voss was there. He struck Arthur with a knife. I swear I didn't know he'd go that far." Miss Marple watched silently, her mind sifting Clara's words. The widow's panic was genuine, but her story was incomplete. She recalled a Dainford farmer who confessed to stealing sheep but omitted his partner's role. Here, Clara was protecting herself, but not entirely lying. "Mrs. Elton," Miss Marple said gently, "the ink on your glove matches Arthur's cuff. You were with him when he wrote that note, weren't you? Perhaps struggling over it." Clara's eyes widened, then dropped. He was writing when I arrived at Blackfriars. I tried to take the note to stop him sending it to the police. We fought, and the ink smeared. But I didn't stab him, Voss did." Craddock dispatched men to arrest Voss, who was found at his club, a cigar in hand, his limp more pronounced under stress. Confronted with the pocketbook and Clara's accusations, Voss's charm dissolved. "She's lying," he spat. "Clara planned it all. She wanted the ledger to blackmail me. I only meant to scare Arthur, but she struck the blow." Miss Marple listened, her mind piecing together the final threads. The cigar smoke in Arthur's chambers, the limping man at the Lyceum, the precise stab wound. Both Clara and Voss were complicit, their mutual accusations a tangle of half-truths. "Inspector," she said, "I believe they both played their parts. Clara lured Arthur to Blackfriars, knowing Voss would be there. Voss, with his limp and cigar, struck the fatal blow, but Clara ensured Arthur was vulnerable. The ink stain ties them both to the moment of his death. Craddock, though sceptical of her methods, saw the logic. "We'll charge them both," he said, "conspiracy and murder. The ledger will seal Voss's fate, and this note nails Clara." As the culprits were led away, Beatrice joined Miss Marple in the library, her face etched with grief but also gratitude. "Jane, you've given Arthur justice. I don't know how to thank you." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her hands folded over her handbag. "No need, Beatrice. Evil, like weeds, must be uprooted, whether in Dainford or London." The next morning, Miss Marple boarded a train to Dainford, the fog lifting as the city receded. She thought of Arthur, a young man undone by ambition and betrayal, and of the clues, ticket, ink, smoke, that had unravelled the crime. In Dainford, a lost locket had once led her to a thief. Here, a pocketbook had pointed to murderers. As the countryside rolled past, she resumed her knitting, the pink shawl taking shape, her mind already turning to the quiet mysteries of home, where human nature, like the fog, always revealed its secrets in time.